Hello and welcome to today's Learning Network webinar with the fantastic Sophie and Robin from Make Real, one of our fantastic industry partners. We'll just give it a minute while people arrive. Oh, here everyone comes. They're flooding in the doors now. Hello to everyone joining us. Thank you for taking the time out on a Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? Still the start of the week. It feels like it should be Friday by now, but maybe that's just me. Let us know in the chat where you're joining from today and what you're looking to get out of the session. I won't take up too much time at the start, but just to let you all know, there will be a space to kind of discuss this in the events channel on Slack after the session. So please share your thoughts there and continue the conversation. And remember to check out the events page on the Learning Network website. We have a couple of big events coming up. We have Beyond the Basics in Edinburgh, if you live kind of north of the wall. And in London in November, we have the Connect conference back, which is shaping up really nicely. You can find all the details on the website. But without further ado, because I know you're not here to listen to me babble on about the network, I'm going to hand over the reins to Sophie and Robin. Thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
I've just seen that someone said that the chat is disabled, so that's going to be my first opening gambit.
I will fix that now.
It might get lonely for us if
that does explain why no one responded to my hi everyone.
Well, also not to point fingers, but you did just say that to me and Tom. You did it to panelists only, so no one else knows that you said hi everyone. But
you go everyone now and try again.
So I just like smug tech support in the background. I'll stop talking.
That should now be fixed.
Cool.
Stuff. Great. So shall I start? So are you comfortable and happy?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. So if you just want to flick down to the next slide for me, that'd be great. So yeah, just quickly to introduce ourselves. My name is Robin Scott. I'm the Managing Director of Make Real, and I've been working with innovative and immersive technologies for the better part of 25 years now. Everything from flight simulators through games and onto technologies like virtual and augmented reality, and more recently, obviously, AI as well. So pass you over now to Sophie to introduce herself.
Hello, so I'm Sophie Costin. I'm the Director of Learning at Make Real.
Thanks, Sophie. And for the format for the webinar today, I'm going to spend the first 5 or 10 minutes just giving a bit of positioning, a bit of context to what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to show you some examples, some very basic, straightforward examples of AI in use, both in the context of what Sophie's going to be talking about, but also showing me using AI in the actual preparation of this talk today. I'm then going to talk a little bit more broadly about the AI landscape and the different types of AI, and hopefully demystify it a bit and show how AI has been in use for quite some time already. And then after that, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Sophie, who's going to spend probably 20 to 25 minutes having a bit more of a sort of deeper look into diagnostic AI and some of the experiments that we've been running over the last 9-12 months. And hopefully everyone will get some insights and takeaways from that. So Sophie, if you could flick on to the next slide for me.
Sorry.
Right. Yeah, so to start with that sort of positioning and context piece. So firstly, it's important to say we're not coming to you today and pretending to be AI experts. We are AI users, and we do have a good understanding of what's going on underneath the hood, but we are practitioners like you. We're learning practitioners rather than AI experts. And that's really important to note. What we're here to do really is to demystify AI, show how it can be practically used today, and cut through that sort of hype. We've all seen that AI is either going to destroy humanity or make all of our wildest dreams come true. And of course, the reality is somewhere much more in between. Hopefully we'll demystify that, de-hype that. We're not here to sell a platform or a product or anything like that. We're literally here to share the benefit of our experiences with you, as we tend to be an early adopter of these kind of technologies, given that we work at an innovative and immersive technology agency. And then finally, just to make the point as well, there is a massive conversation to be had around the moral and ethical issues around AI, everything from legislation being way behind the technology, which it is, through to copyright infringement and so on. This is a really broad topic that would warrant, quite a significant talk in and of its own right. So whilst we will touch upon it in some of the things we say, that's not what we're really here to sort of discuss in detail. Although, obviously we're happy to take any questions at the end of the session around that as well. I can see quite a few people have said hello now in the chat. Appreciate that. It's good to see you there. It's always a bit weird presenting to my own deck rather than a load of faces or people, but thanks for saying hello, and we'll move through. So nextly, just before we go on to the next slide, I'm going to show you now, that's fine to do as long as the video doesn't play. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. This is more for the benefit, I suppose, of those who haven't yet had a chance to engage with AI. What we want to show with this is just how simple your initial engagements can be and how you can start using it practically straight away. So I'm going to show you 3 examples in a second. 2 of those are around generative AI, which you'll have heard so much about. That's your chat GPTs or your image generation tools like Midjourney, which we're going to show. Although actually then we're going to show a very quick sneak peek of what Sophie's going to be talking about, which is more diagnostic AI, which we're going to go into more detail because we think there's been lots of column inches dedicated to generative AI already, and we wanted to show you something a little bit different that has real practical uses for learning today. So there's no sound on this video, so unfortunately I'm going to carry on talking over the top of it. So if you could just play that now. So this first one is Midjourney. This is an image generation tool. You'll see some prompts going in, and when Midjourney creates 4 examples based on any prompt you give, and you'll see there's some icons being created, which I created for this presentation. You may well spot them later on as I go through, but that just goes to show how simple it is to type something in, get 4 examples, and then you can work into those. Then we have the sort of ubiquitous chat GPT that everyone I'm sure will have heard of by now. And this is me asking it what I should talk about today. So Sophie often talks about the tyranny of the blank page. But, this is a great tool for helping you get over that. So I said, I've got 8 to 10 minutes to talk about different types of AI and set context. What would you talk about? And it gave me a great plan, gave me all sorts of timings, which I used as a basis for the talk. And then finally here, you'll see my colleague Sophie just going through and using our diagnostic AI demo, which she's going to talk about in more detail shortly. But again, that's just to give you a little bit of a scene set, show you the kinds of things we're talking about somewhat briefly, which we'll go into more detail later. Great. So Sophie, if you could flick onto the next slide. Great. So we're rattling through this pretty quickly, so I can afford to take a deep breath here and maybe talk in a little bit more detail. So what I wanted to give you at this point is a bit more of an overview of the AI landscape and where the different things you might have heard of fit into that, and hopefully also show you that some types of AI have been with us now for 20 or 30 years. So it's, whilst there's a lot of hype around it right now, and there's a lot of new stuff right now, a lot of very new and shiny things, it's also the case that AI has been developing over a long period of time. So again, I actually worked up this slide. There's lots of different ways to categorize AI, and if there are any AI experts on this call, you might have a different view as to ways of categorizing it. But again, just to give it some contextual relevance, I actually worked with ChatGPT to look at some different types of categorization. And I like this one because it had really good examples of things that most of us have probably heard of. So if we start over on the left-hand side of this slide, you have things like generative and diagnostic AI. That's the thing we've either shown you already, that we've used to help create this presentation, or that Sophie will talk about in more detail. So I won't pause on them for too long, but I think hopefully everyone understands that generative AI, can create you images, audio, text, and so on. Basically, at its heart, it can help you to create a lot of content. And diagnostic AI, you may well have heard of it in use in healthcare already, where it's been used really effectively and more accurately than humans to spot potential health issues, say in X-rays or in tests and so on and so forth. And it's already starting to make a really significant improvement into some healthcare diagnostics. Although we're going to show a very different, very learning-focused use for diagnostic AI shortly. So they're over on the left there. But then moving across this sort of grid, we've got things like reactive AI. So an example, reactive AI basically uses brute force. It doesn't really know about what has happened in the past or care. It doesn't really try and predict what's going to happen in the future. It just looks based on a set of rules it has in front of it at every possible combination. And as I say, it just uses brute force computing power to analyze every single way forward and then think which is the best one for the situation I'm in. And a perfect example of that being IBM Deep Blue, which, if any of you remember, was the first AI supercomputer to actually beat a chess grand champion when it beat Garry Kasparov in 1997. It lost in 1996 and then beat Garry Kasparov in 1997. And that's an example of a reactive one. But again, 1997, all my maths is bad, but it's getting on between 25 and 30 years ago. Then you've got examples like narrow AI. So again, we'd all be familiar with Google search, Siri, those kind of personal assistants, often called weak AI. Again, this is about focusing on specific tasks like pointing you at other forms of info like web pages, completing translations, your facial recognition to get into your smartphone, that kind of thing. But again, it's been with us for quite a long time, but it's quite narrow in its scope. Then you're starting to get into some of the more interesting ones. So again, they're into limited memory AI. This retains some memory of what's happened before. It has some predictive capabilities about what's coming up. But again, usually in fairly specific situations. A good example being something like Tesla Autopilot, which is far from being perfected yet itself. But that's a good example of one of those as well that's been in development for a while. Then you come into your sort of general AI, of which ChatGPT is probably the best example we have, which is why I put it in here rather than in generative. Because while ChatGPT can generate you content and do all of those kind of tasks, you can also have a conversation with it. It also, is the closest we've come to passing the Turing test, if anyone is familiar with that, which is basically something developed by Alan Turing. Post second, I can't remember. I don't know. I was about to say when he came up with a theory, but then I'd be I'm not sure I have the exact date on that. But effectively, the Turing test says that if an observer observes a conversation between a human and an AI, if they can't tell which is the human and which is the AI, then we've reached human levels of intelligence. Now, again, that's quite vague and not sure we have reached human levels of intelligence, although you could argue that ChatGPT does pass the Turing test. And in fact, Sophie's going to touch upon that in one of her slides shortly, which is quite interesting. But it can perform quite a few more tasks as well. And there's hundreds of plugins springing up for ChatGPT to cover all kinds of things. And then finally, over here on the right, we get into the kind of stuff that sci-fi is made of, and even we're never going to have to work again, or we're all doomed opinions come from. And you've got things like theory of the mind and self-aware. Now, what's important to say is that we're not there yet. And whilst things like ChatGPT can seem self-aware, especially if you read some of the more sort of, sensationalist headlines, it can seem self-aware, but basically it's saying stuff based on what you say to it. And what it's very good at is imitating human natural language. That doesn't mean it's conscious. That doesn't mean it's going to try and break out of its confines and start, launching weapons at us or anything like that. And then finally, you've got things like theory of the mind as well. And this is, again, kind of linked to the self-awareness piece. Whilst we're going to show you today examples of diagnostic, where it's looking at diagnosing something like a human emotional state, and Sophie will talk about how accurate that currently is. This is more about then interpreting those emotions and things like beliefs and intentions, which are a lot harder and a lot more deep kind of, deep things to overcome, I suppose, or for the AIs. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of an idea of the different types of AI, the fact that there are quite a few different strands of AI. And as I say, that some have been around with us for quite a while and some are very new. If you'd like to flick onto the next slide, Sophie. So again, we're going to focus quite closely on generative and diagnostic. So the generative part is this talk itself. I think pretty much all bar maybe one, and perhaps that's a visual Turing test, of the images created in this that are in this deck are created by AI. The two icons you're looking at right now were created by AI, and we saw that in the little video I showed earlier. All of the images of humans that you see and so on, all created by AI. I used AI to help me start with a structure as a starting point. And I'll sort of touch upon that a little bit more in the next slide about how you get from that starting point to something really useful. But examples of generative AI are things like ChatGPT, DALL-E, Midjourney, and many more besides. Honestly, when we first created this slide deck, I suppose April time, we were looking at a list of tens. Now we're already looking at a list of hundreds. But effectively, they fall into the categories of text, video, audio, and then more specialized plugins as well. And then finally, and then also we have this diagnostic AI bit, and some examples there for you to take a look at if you want to look more closely would be IBM Watson Tone Analyzer that can look at what you're saying and the tone and draw analysis and conclusion from that. Things like Azure Face API or Morphcast, which actually interpret your facial expressions, tone and other things to draw conclusions about, say, how engaged you are or what your emotional state is. And again, this is what Sophie will touch on shortly. And then, so just to wrap up my section now, if you just flip onto the next slide, Sophie, to summarize it all and to give a sort of sense of where we feel we are today. And I heard this on a Radio 4, I'd love to claim it as mine, but I heard it on a Radio 4 program with a true expert in AI. I like this way he put it. He said, right now, don't think of it as AI, think of it as IA. Think of it as intelligence augmented. There's nothing sentient right now, but the tools that are there can kind of give you superpowers. They really, really can. I mean, the ability to research topics in tight timeframes is, these kind of tools are massively helpful in that. To give some context, when we're creating these talks, using AI tools, Sophie and I might have worked on a talk that we're going to run out for a season of events, maybe taking me 40 hours, and that wouldn't include Sophie's time, and she usually goes into more detail as well, but that would be research, writing, and then doing those tasks that certainly I really don't enjoy, like creating a PowerPoint deck. But when it came to this talk, I was able to use AI to really help make that process more efficient. And rather than it just saving me time, what I actually found was I'm using that time to better understand my subject matter, and then using the tools themselves to give me a more rapid, deeper view of that than I would have found otherwise. So, and we'll go on to show this in a bit more detail, but as I say, I'm sure Sophie will touch upon this as well. A part of this right now, human intelligence is still really important. But imagine having that sort of omnipresent, omniscient assistant, whether you're a developer, a designer, a script writer, a content writer, a learning designer, or a learning director. These tools can really help give you those superpowers. Okie dokie. So I think that covers up my context setting and a bit of a broader look. Hope that was useful. And now I'll pass over to Sophie, who will take you through some of our stuff in more detail.
Lovely, thank you so much. So hopefully that's given us a sense of what AI is, and also some of the main platforms that maybe you want to go and play around with afterwards. But I just want to spend the next sort of 15 minutes thinking about, why is AI good for learning? How can it be good for learning? And we're also going to focus in on a specific use case as well. So to kick that off, why is AI useful for learning? Well, I asked an AI. I asked one AI and I asked one human. And I was wondering if you would like to guess in the channel, answers on a postcard or in the channel. Do we think that option 1 was created by an AI? I can't see the chat at the moment. I don't know if anyone else can. Oh, there we go. 1. Does anyone think option 2 is created by an AI? Oh, no response thus far.
Well, we got a couple of early option 1s. Oh, no, we got a couple of 2s as well, reasonably split.
Who thinks that I'm lying to you and they're actually both written by a human? Who thinks that I'm lying to you and they're actually both created by AI? Oh, yeah. Trick question, very bad for learning, terrible me, but these were double curveball, exactly. So these were both created by AI. ChatGPT on the left-hand side, which I really struggle to say. So I'm going to mix up those letters throughout this presentation, but I'll start as I mean to go on. ChatGPT, which Robin showed us a little preview of earlier. I'm sure most people have heard of it. It's been making headlines sort of all around the world. Google Bard, perhaps a little bit less well known, but you can think of it like Google's answer to ChatGPT. It's a very similar offering. Both of the answers that they gave me were actually a bit more detailed than this. Google Bard, for example, said AI is useful for corporate learning and development because it can help automate tasks, provide personalized learning experience, and track employee progress. So it actually wrote it out in prose for me. So in both of these responses, there's a lot about that sort of speed and efficiency that can be gained from using AI to create tailored, personalized learning content. But I think it's actually ChatGPT's last point around improved performance that for learners, from the learner's perspective, is possibly the most interesting area of AI at the moment. And to contextualize that a bit, one area of AI that's not so widely discussed, but it's very much on the rise, is emotional recognition. Emotional recognition AI is the ability for an algorithm to read our facial expressions and interpret that into an emotion. It's being used already. It's being used in classrooms to measure engagement. It's being used a lot in China for that. It's being used for market research, to test consumer reactions to things like films and consumer goods. It's becoming much more commonplace in recruitment, especially for businesses and industries that have to recruit at scale. And also increasingly it's being used in policing and border control as well. So those are some of the key areas. And while emotional recognition AI might all sound suitably sci-fi, it really is being used here and now, and it is on the rise as well. So emotional recognition technology in classrooms apparently more than doubled over lockdown, and the industry itself is expected to double over the coming year, with predictions that it will be worth $90 billion by 2024. So it's a very real thing that's with us today. And to give a tangible example of that, Disney have their own algorithm that they use to detect audience reactions to films. They won't just do this in any cinema. You haven't been subjected to this. You would know if you've been subjected to this. But they used it to research audience reactions to blockbuster films like Star Wars: The Force Awakens and Zootopia, if you've seen either of those. And they report that within 10 minutes of the algorithm reading facial expressions, it can predict an audience member's reaction to the rest of the film. That's pretty impressive. But it's not all good news. If nothing else, some counter reports suggest that actually Disney's algorithm is no more effective than just asking the audience members what they think of the film. So allowing them to watch it for 10 minutes, asking them what they think of the film so far and how much they think they're going to enjoy it is probably as accurate and as insightful as getting the algorithm to do it. So there's that. But probably a more serious concern is about the potential for bias in these algorithms. So there was a study in 2018 with NBA players in America that was looking at some of this AI emotional recognition technology. And it found that specific algorithm was twice as likely to read a black player's facial expression as angry compared to a white player pulling the same facial expression, right? So that's obviously unacceptable in its own right. But then when you think about it in terms of use cases for policing and border force, then this becomes much more serious and potentially much more sinister. So how we measure emotion and the data sets we use as reference are really important. But how do we measure emotion? That's sort of the next big question then. And part of the trouble is that we can't agree how we categorize, how we interpret emotions between ourselves as human beings. So then teaching a computer how to do it is inherently problematic. And that's probably a challenge for AI across the board. It's a sort of global challenge of AI. What are we training it to do in the first place if, we all need to agree what good looks like? and in a lot of areas we don't. In Brené Brown's latest book, The Atlas of the Heart, she quotes a neuroscientist who says there are as many theories of emotion as there are emotional theorists. So therein lies the problem. Which one are you going to pick? Having said that, there are a couple of theories that tend to dominate emotional recognition technology. The two main types of analysis are categorical and dimensional, and it's worth understanding each of those just a little bit. So categorical analysis is what we can see represented on the left of the screen here, and it registers one of 7 emotional families, which are supposedly universal and cross-cultural. So things like anger and disgust and happiness. And that's what it's sort of boiling your reactions down into. Whereas dimensional analysis over here on the right is plotting your facial expression on a spectrum of arousal and valence, and from that it's diagnosing one of 98 different emotional effects, which can be grouped into high energy emotions, low energy, positive and negative moods, which is what we can see here on the right. I've been having a little play around with examples of each, as is my wont, and categorical analysis is a really great place to get started because it's so simple. It's really easy to understand when you're first sort of getting your head into what is this technology doing. Just having it boiled down into one of these 7 groups is really useful. It's really great for use cases like market research, where you've got this large data set, you've got this large sample size that you need to aggregate down into a dominant mood. It's really good for that kind of thing. But when it comes to giving individuals feedback, it's a little bit too binary. It lacks that nuance. It's very broad brushstrokes. Whereas dimensional analysis, on the other hand, has that nuance and feels really quite compelling. It feels really interesting. So we wanted to do something with it. You find out these things, you want to put them into practice, right? So we wanted to create a proof of concept to try this technology out. But even with dimensional analysis, that more nuanced version, I still wasn't convinced that it was nuanced enough to serve you content based on what it was interpreting. So, if you look a bit sort of confused or disengaged, would it serve you extra content to support you? If you looked really happy and engaged, would it sort of sail you through and sort of take you through a quicker route? I didn't quite feel like we were there yet, but our guiding principle of AI is that human intelligence is still at the heart of everything we do. So this is just your intelligence augmented, as Robin was saying earlier. So we thought we'd try creating an app that lets you practice having a difficult conversation, and then it feeds back on your performance. You're able to see all that analysis. So you're still the human intelligence at the heart of this. You're still driving this, but it's giving you feedback on bits of your performance and highlighting areas where you might want to improve. But it's still up to you to look at that feedback and go, okay, yeah, no, I can see I'm going to action that bit. I'm going to try that bit again. And this bit here, actually, I'm going to put a pin in this one. That's not relevant to me. And you're sort of interpreting it in that way. I have a little video capture that I can show you of me trying the app. So this is just something we put together in a couple of weeks. It's been a bit of a passion project at Make Real, so we've been developers have been slipping in the time. So you can see here, this is encouraging you to practice this difficult conversation. When it starts, you have this acclimatization screen where you can see what the measurements are. You get used to that. And then you're encouraged to, the idea is that your project is delayed and you've got to tell your manager. The analysis has now disappeared so that you can concentrate on just having the conversation with that other person and you're not being distracted by that. This is just, your idea of best practice. And then it's giving you an overview of your dominant mood, whether that was positive or negative, your energy, high or low, your attentiveness, how much eye contact you created. And it's also mixing that with your facial expressions as well to diagnose an average attentiveness. And then the words that were most strongly associated, those emotional effects that were most strongly associated with your performance. You can then watch it back, so you can then see the inline feedback with your delivery. You can look back through and go, okay, well, I was quite happy with that bit, but this bit wasn't quite landing as I expected. Okay, I'm going to concentrate on that bit. So that is where we got to with that. This is encouraging you. So we've put a little scenario together so that people we've done other ones before where we just say, oh, you can say anything. And we find that people get really overwhelmed with that. They're not used to talking to technology yet in quite that way. So we gave people a little scenario to deliver on, and we've sort of found that that helps keep people focused. But there's no reason that it needs to be a difficult conversation. You can practice any conversation that you want to succeed in or improve in into it. Did I practice this talk into it? You bet I did. So this is what I got like last week when I was practicing my talk into the app. I hope this is all coming across. Positive mood, high energy. That's what we need for a Tuesday morning. My attentiveness was down. I was looking at my notes. So that all checks out. And these were the emotions that were associated with my performance that I hope is coming across today. What I found quite interesting about this compared to the other one where I was trying to do a difficult conversation was that when I got the results for the difficult conversation, it said that I had a low energy. And I was like, how dare you? I've never had a low energy in my life. But actually, yeah, that's really appropriate, isn't it? If you're trying to deliver a difficult message, then actually being animated and high energy probably isn't appropriate. And so there's this other piece maybe around sort of directing people to what appropriate looks like for the type of conversation that they're trying to have. And I think that was one of my big takeaways from this. So we did run a small sample size in the a small study, with a small sample size in amongst the studio. So we got various people around the studio. We also sort of explored people who have different accents, people who have facial hair, people who don't have facial hair, sort of delivering messages into this app. And we found that it was about 10% less accurate than a human baseline at detecting emotion. Proper serious academic studies have found that this technology is about 20% less accurate at detecting human emotion than this kind of technology. So it's in that kind of ballpark. But obviously, this technology is always on, it's always available, whereas human coaches maybe aren't always available. It's a private space, which can be really nice for, you still have a bit of self-consciousness talking to a webcam, as I can attest to now. I'm alone in a room with my cat. I am hoping that you're all there still listening, but I am effectively just talking to my webcam, and you feel a little bit self-conscious doing so, but not nearly as self-conscious if you're sort of practicing role-playing to another person. And then obviously things around consistency of feedback. If the other person's having an off day or a bit distracted, then they're not going to be able to give you the same quality of feedback every single time, whereas this app can. But I think the thing that I found so interesting was just how invigorating and insightful people seem to find it. It was this really nice objective mirror that they could talk into. And everyone seemed to come away with a bit of a deeper understanding of themselves or a specific insight that they wanted to work on, and they seem really motivated by it. So that's what makes this technology really compelling for me. And as a result, we've been sort of doing further experiments with it. Nothing that I have to show you today past this tiny screen capture. So our next step was to bring ChatGPT into our demo, which we have done. And the first thing we did was develop a way of creating a transcript of what you've said. And we can do lots of really interesting things with that transcript once we have that as text. So the first thing we've got it to do is get ChatGPT to respond as though it is the other person in the conversation. So in this scenario, it is the manager. And you can see I've just done a very quick response to delivering this news that the project is delayed, and ChatGPT has responded to what I've said there. The next thing we'd like to look at is getting ChatGPT to then offer coaching tips. So to analyze what I've said there and say, oh, this was good, but actually what you could have said instead of this thing was X, Y, and Z. We're making strides in that, but the prompt, I have discovered, it's all important, and we're just refining what that prompt is to make sure that we get the best out of ChatGPT, basically. Once we've done that, another thing that I'd really like to explore is sentiment analysis. So taking that transcript and analysing the words that you've used to look for trends in terms of, are you using positive language, are you using negative language, are you using the kinds of words that are going to create a connection with the other person, that kind of thing. So that's all on our roadmap for this demo. So that leads me nicely onto, this is what we've learnt from our demo, this little proof of concept, getting started with AI. And I thought I'd just pull that together into a handy list of do's and don'ts for you, so that we can share our learnings. I'll start with the don'ts so that we can end on a positive do list. So first of all, don't expect things to get quicker straight away. Working out how and where AI can add value will take time, as will identifying the right tools to use, how to use them. All of this takes a big time investment. So things will likely actually get quite a bit slower before then they get quite a bit faster. So that. We never advocate using technology for technology's sake, and this is no different. So I'd really suggest, thinking about, in terms of where AI can add value, think about bits of your process that are slow or time consuming, or there are pain points, and then looking for an AI solution for that, as opposed to finding an AI app or an AI tool that looks fun and then trying to find a way to sort of work it into your processes. That's fun too, but I think it probably will have a bit less longevity in terms of business use cases and that kind of thing. Don't overstretch AI's capability. Human intelligence is still at the heart of everything we do. So I think the most interesting use cases are where it enables our human intelligence, where it triggers things like our curiosity and creativity and imagination. So look for use cases around that. Then moving on to the do's. Do think about your data set. This was a bit of a revelation for me in terms of where are we getting the data from to give answers, for where is this AI existing? Understanding the data sets that you have access to, whether that's OpenAI, whether you're using a platform, whether it's your own data, you really need to understand the quality of that data, because that's going to directly relate to the quality of responses that you get back from it. And in the worst case scenario, that could relate to things like bias, like we saw with the with that study in 2018, but it could also just lead to invalid responses. So you really got to get under the hood and understand what it's actually doing, so that you can stay in control of it. Expect to learn new skills. Prompt writing is definitely the big one for me. It was another sort of revelation that I had, was that two people can ask an AI to do the same thing, and potentially they're going to get quite different outputs depending on how they've worded that prompt. So that really is a new skill for us all to learn. But there's other things as well, other things for us to hone, like curation will be a big one, learner-led delivery, that kind of thing. Start small with your experimentation. The use case here sort of directly involves the learner in the AI, but actually I think there's loads of really valid use cases that are more for the learning team. So things that are time consuming, like script writing, or, coming up with sort of skills competency tables and that kind of thing. Things like ChatGPT can really speed up processes here and get you much more familiar with what AI is and the skills that you need. So once you've kind of worked out how to be effective with those kind of use cases, then you'll be ready to take the next step. But lastly, just get involved is our big do for AI. I think it's such an exciting time to be working in learning technologies. The pace of change is like nothing certainly I've ever seen before. So it's time to start experimenting, and the sooner you do it, the better. That was all we had to say, I think, on AI, unless there's anything you wanted to pick up on from what I said, Robin.
No, nothing particularly. Again, just, as you say, that the practical use case that hopefully you can see from that diagnostic AI certainly make real. We do. And again, the demo we showed you isn't something that's for sale. We're not pushing a product here. It is an experiment. And we do encourage anyone who wants to engage with us in that experiment. The more people we can get to try it, the more accurate we can get. Accurate again is a moving target in a sense, but the more we can hone what we're doing, and then hopefully share those outcomes with you as we've done today. But hopefully you can extrapolate from what we've shown you the potential uses across a whole number of soft skills applications. And I know soft skills is not necessarily a great term for what we're talking about, but we do a lot of work with, say, financial institutions around negotiation, around having difficult conversations, around mental health, and so on and so forth. And hopefully you can see how the kind of things Sophie showed you can really play into that and help give that feedback. I think one of the only other things that I would have mentioned was as you said, Sophie, the technology is, say, somewhere between 80 and 90% as accurate as a human at diagnosing these things, but then humans themselves are far from
100, yeah.
in reading emotions, as we all know. There is a massive range of that across the sort of neurodiverse scale. So, it's all just really, really interesting stuff, whether it's generative, helping with content, as we've done, or diagnostic. So I hope there was something to take from that. There was one question already in the channel, Sophie, which I could throw to you straight away if you're okay with that.
I think I saw, about what does valence mean? Yeah, so obviously arousal is a term that's used a lot in gaming specifically, but that's your attentiveness, and the way that the technology that we're using is measuring arousal is this kind of blend between eye contact, head position as well. So if you're sort of like looking off, then you're less engaged, but also the facial expressions you're pulling. So it's kind of blending all those things together to get an arousal state for you, an arousal value. And then the valence, if you Google valence definition, you get a lot of beds and valence trims and that kind of thing. But it's a psychological term. It's used by psychologists, and I don't know why. I don't understand what the relationship between the bed trim and this term in psychology is. But it's used to refer to emotions, basically, in terms of positive and negative. So a negative value of valence would relate to negative emotions like grief, that kind of thing, and a positive value of valence would relate to positive emotions like happiness, joy, that kind of thing. We don't know the etymology of that, but that is functionally what it means. That was clear.
Excellent.
And in terms of what that technology is doing, so you've got your sort of X and your Y values, and between it's again sort of blending your arousal state with your valence state and then plotting you on that crosshair, and that then will relate to one of 98 different emotional effects, they're called. So it's much more nuanced, but then equally that level of nuance then comes with that level of precision you might disagree with. So there's that kind of trade-off as well, and I think it's quite useful to almost think about it as high energy, low energy. That's why we've interpreted the feedback in that way, because when you get that level of granular, it's maybe too precise. So I think it all needs taking sort of in its context and as an average, as it were.
Jane Davids, thanks very much for just pointing out in the chat there and pointing the audience at the Microsoft free training course available on this. I concur, that is a great place to start, and as Sophie said, getting involved, reading in, but more to the point, using it as much as you can as well. A lot of my best learnings around how AI can help me practically today have been just to get in there and start using it and getting used to having a conversation with it. Sophie touched on the art of the prompt, and that's something that I strongly sort of believe in. Your first few goes will feel quite rudimentary when you can go back and look at your conversation history, and the AI's ability to remember the discussion you've already had and hone in further in things like generative AI can be really, really, really useful and can save an enormous amount of time. I'm just going to give one more quick example from the generative side, because we touched on diagnostics so much. We were recently creating an onboarding course for a large financial institution, and they wanted to take the learner into 4 different global markets, as in real physical marketplaces, and look at how those markets have evolved over time. And we needed, as part of our design for the learning application, we needed an item that would have been available at all of those moments in time. And it would have taken I don't know how many hours to kind of figure something out, but we were able to again ask an AI, and we were able to find an item that would have been relevant to all 4 of those market situations, which spread out over a couple of 100 years. So again, just using it in that sort of sense to help us research things more quickly and come up with devices that we need more quickly was really valuable as well. Cool, just like to throw that one in. Sorry, I'm just reading down here. I think Mark Woodman there is also put in, sorry, I'm just trying to read through that comment there. It's not covered modern LLMs like GPTs. Yeah, and more book recommendations there. Thank you very much, Mark. Now, does anyone have any specific questions for? I mean, we have a little bit of time left, so does anybody have any specific questions for Sophie and or I from a practitioner perspective?
Well, just while we're waiting for anything to come in the chat, one thing that I'd quite like to capture for the recording, if nothing else, and because I count myself into this place, a lot of us are kind of in that very early adopter stage of how do I use this? How do I get started? So if I'm there as an L&D practitioner, I'm there. Maybe I've got a ChatGPT account and I've asked it to make a D&D character because I'm lazy. Who would do such a thing? That's largely what my history with it is, anyway. Where would you advise getting started? What can I do that's going to add value and that's going to kind of help me get to grips with, how I can use these tools?
Well, Sophie, do you mind if I go first on that one?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, what I've tended to do is every time I'm doing a task that I find either time consuming or it's not adding a huge amount of value to the outcomes that I'm trying to get, I ask myself, do I think there's an AI tool that could do this, ChatGPT or other? And then I invest a little bit of time into actually practically trying it out and seeing what I can achieve. And that's been a great starting point for me, starting with those things that, again, where automation would be really, really helpful. I do have some examples of that, but they would take a little while to explain. But I found that I personally, whilst I'd like to understand the theory and have a good sound understanding of the basis of things, I find getting in there and using it practically is the most valuable thing for me. Because again, once you start using the prompts, you find that your ability to write good prompts develops quite rapidly. And as Sophie mentioned, it's perfectly possible for two people who want the same outcome to get a completely different response from an AI, depending on the question they ask it. Sophie, do you have anything to add before I give one?
Yeah, just I think that in that first step about, it'll get slower before it gets quicker. I think that there's an intention there. So now how I use AI, predominantly I do use ChatGPT. That's my top app. And when I know I need to use it, it's when I'm avoiding a task on my to-do list. I'm like, oh, that feels long and complicated. And that's when I know that I need to talk to ChatGPT as a starting point, because it'll either give me some really useful insights or it will give me something to disagree with. So I created a mail shot for World of Learning back in the winter, based on ChatGPT. A lot of it went in, but a lot of it I was like, no, that's not how we say that. That's misrepresenting us. And it just gave me something to riff off of, which was really valuable. I've also used it recently when I got some really complicated client content. It's just intrinsically complicated. It's sort of high level content. And so I asked ChatGPT to simplify it for me. And then from there, I was able to design a game around teaching other people this content, because now I understood it, where I really couldn't have got to that point by just looking at it, because I didn't understand it myself. So how was I ever going to design anything that would actually make it clearer for other people? But I think the first step of that is just the intention of, I'm going to get familiar with some AI apps. So if you find a spare 30 minutes in your calendar, I think Helen there has asked us what 3 apps we recommend, intentionally set aside 30 minutes to an hour to go and open ChatGPT, definitely. Midjourney, third app. I don't know, Robin, do you have a view on what your other killer AI app is?
No, I try so many, that's the thing, but I would say certainly, just for ease of use and access for me right now, GPT-1. Midjourney is my favorite image generation engine, but you do have to access it via Discord, which is, for those of you who are familiar with something, a tool we use like Slack, a communication tool. It's kind of a sort of open global communication tool. So it's a slightly odd way of accessing it, but ultimately you just sign up for a Discord account and interact with it that way. But
my third one would actually be Drawsome. Is that what it's called? Quick Draw. It's by Google, and it's like you play Pictionary with Google and you draw on the screen and it guesses what you're drawing, Quick Draw, based on what you're drawing it. But the reason I think that's really good and a really good place to get started is it reveals the data set that it's using at the end. You can explore it and you can see it's been tracking the sequence of lines. It told me to draw a trombone. I drew a trumpet, but it knew I meant a trumpet just because so many other people have made the same mistake as I had. And I think that's really insightful as to the level of data that you actually need to get meaningful outputs. So I would say Quick Draw would be my other good place to get started. Also a bunch of fun. It's really good fun. You can waste quite a lot of time in that. But yeah, I would set aside some time, like an hour, get yourself familiar with sort of 3 apps. And then when you find things on your to-do list that you are avoiding, then you're like, okay, I think maybe I could do with a bit of support here. And you go and chat to them.
Exactly that. And that kind of goes back, Sophie, to my thing about those tasks which you find low value, high pain is another way of saying the ones you avoid doing. Yeah, exactly that. And interesting here, I'm seeing quite a few people talking about, using the prompt and realizing that it's not like Google where you say, put in a term and you get a list of websites, put in a slightly different term, you just get another list of websites. With GPT, you can, and other engines like Bard, you can slowly refine that via conversation with the AI itself. And I think that is a really, really valuable extra layer. One thing I would say as well is there are a whole host of X now, isn't it? It's X as of 2 days ago.
The
social media platform formerly known as Twitter, LinkedIn, and all sorts of other channels that give you great sort of cheat sheets. Think about the sort of verb charts that you would have seen for creating learning objectives. There are lots of great cheat sheets that help give you really useful words when creating prompts and useful ways of phrasing things. Everything from, like, when you work with Midjourney, for example, I was asking it to create stuff, and then I saw one of the cheat sheets that just said, well, if you want that image in a certain aspect ratio, like widescreen 16:9, you can just put AS 16:9. And it knows that that's what you mean by that. Again, so there are really helpful cheat sheets that help accelerate your prompt writing and make that more effective as well. And they really are everywhere. There's no specific one I would point you towards. Again, if you're struggling to find one, ask an AI one for itself. Say, what kind of shortcuts can I use? Explain to me how to create good prompts around, but try and be specific with what you're asking it for. So again, right now you're asking a human to help you with some of this advice, but again, get stuck in, start asking the AI, see what they can come up with. Don't always believe it by rote just because they're telling it to you. It's always, worth checking anything out and doing some additional investigation if it doesn't seem to quite ring true. And as we pointed out throughout this talk, what we get from AI is usually useful 70, 80, so let's say somewhere between 60 and 90% of it. It's very rare that we get an output and that's it, perfectly good enough on its own. Even if you look at the imagery in this talk, whilst hopefully everything looked and made sense, some of the human beings that have been included in some of the images have 6 fingers, for example. But so there's always, when you look closely, you can always find these little discrepancies. Nothing is perfect, and it's really worthwhile remembering that as well. I'm also seeing, again, comments like from Amy here. We said we would touch upon this. AIs like Midjourney coming under fire for using existing artists' work and so on. It's a really interesting area. There's a well-known phrase that all art is derivative. I write songs, and I write songs based on all the songs I've ever heard as a human being, in the same way that an AI has been trained by potentially other artists' work. So I'm not going to sit here and say what I believe is right or wrong. What is the case, though, is that it is a very grey area, and expect there to be a lot of change in legislation and everything else. But again, thinking about carefully what you use AI for today, what tasks you use it to help augment your own intelligence, as we touched on earlier. And, I think if you're, you can make a fairly sensible judgment as to whether you're doing anything that is morally or ethically questionable in what you're asking for or what you're likely to produce.
I think that's the thing, because I think Amy was asking, what can we use as an alternative? But all AI is drawing from things of the past. That's kind of the point. It's an aggregation tool of, okay, these are all the things that have existed before, so I'm going to get an average and get you a singular version of that. So they're all looking back at previous artworks, and until there's some legislation on that, that is what it is. So the best you can do is really use it responsibly and don't use it for financial gain. And using it to spike your own sort of creativity and imagination, I think, is a really valid use of it.
Darren has just made a post it's highlighted something very interesting for me. So asking something like ChatGPT effective ways to interact with it can be very, very useful. Asking it what exists, say for example, what tools exist. If you have, Darren, the AIs are only trained up to a certain point in time. So for example, I think ChatGPT until very recently was only its knowledge stopped in 2021 in the latest versions. So again, with the rapid change in the AI landscape and the amount of tools coming on board, don't expect that it's going to have 100% up-to-date knowledge. So asking it, say, for example, what's available in terms of emerging technology might not be the best thing to ask it, but asking it how you can interact with it better and get better results, is less reliant on specific moments in time as well. So it's always worth understanding just some of the fundamentals around the AI you're using, what data set it was trained on, and what time frame it has. So for example, if you ask ChatGPT today, what is the latest, well, I don't know, someone will prove me wrong now, but perhaps if you ask it what the very latest of something is of any given item, it might not know. Although just recently I asked it to do a cross-examination of Campbell's versus Heinz soups, and because both products have been around for ages, it was unbelievable the detail it had about the variants of ingredients, the branding, the market positioning. I learned more about Campbell's versus Heinz soups in 10 minutes than it would have taken me a couple of days to research myself. By the way, there was no commercial reason for me. It was an example that someone came up with in another session I was in, that we thought was a fairly sort of abstract example to see how much detail it could have on historic brands and that kind of thing.
Fantastic. Well, with Heinz and Campbell soup as our main takeaway for today's session, no, that's been really, really brilliant. And as I said before, I would really encourage everyone to utilize the Slack channel to continue the conversation. There have been loads of book recommendations and platform recommendations in the chat, so we'll make sure they all get copied over as well. And the recording of this session will be available in the next 24 hours. As always, we will share links broadly on socials and in the Slack and on the website once they are available. I would just like to say thank you so much, Sophie and Robin, for taking the time today to come and speak to us and share all this fantastic information. And thank you to everyone who has attended as well. You getting involved in the chat really helps bring these sessions to life, and allows us to all kind of share experience and knowledge. So thank you all very much. Sadly, it is now time to go back to work. I'm very sorry, but maybe some of us have got lunch coming up. But thank you for everyone for coming. Hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar and at some of our upcoming events as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.